we are live with today's gamification revolution. My name is Ivan Klo, and I'm the managing editor of the Gamification.co blog, here filling in for Gabe Zickerman, who is away in some foreign country doing gamification business. So today I'm here joined by the lovely Amy Baskin, who is a professor at Florida State College at Jacksonville. How's it going, Amy?
That's going great.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us. For those who have been here before, Amy is a G Summit speaker, and she has been here and talked about this idea of the Grammar Olympics, in which she's used to sort of engage students with grammar. Could you tell us more about the Grammar Olympics and sort of what you've created here, Amy?
Yes, well, many students enter community or state colleges not ready for college. So it's about, as I said
Mm.
in my G Summit talk, it's about 1.7 million every year in the United States. So a lot of
Right.
students test into remedial classes in which they need to brush up their grammar, but they've had grammar before, but for some reason it just hasn't stuck. So it's always trying to come up with more and better creative ways to make it fun. Because if it was fun,
Mhm.
that removed a lot of the fear, it was low stakes, people let their guards down, and they were more
Right.
open to learning.
Mhm.
So it started, I was walking through Target one day and I saw
Yeah.
a a wastebasket like this that's a basketball hoop. And I said, okay, well, that could be fun. And I just took two of them, an A and a B. And then I had a question. Is this a is this a sentence or a fragment? And then they had to throw the basket in the right basket. And that's kind of how everything
Right.
started.
Uh-huh.
And it was really well received. Students were dynamic. They wanted to play. They wanted to hold the basket. They wanted to do it again. They seemed to also actually have a breakthrough in understanding the content. So ever since then, I kept trying to think of more and more ways to incorporate games or props or anything I could to make grammar
Hmm.
fun.
Hmm. That's awesome. I
So
wonder if
that,
you had any I wonder if you had any trouble with some basketball challenged people. Was that ever a factor in some of these games?
well, what I have found with all of the games, and there's usually a kinesthetic challenge, is that the students will help each other. So the person holding the basket, if a player is feeling that they may not have that good aim,
Yeah.
the volunteer student holding the basket will help them. So it's not so much about the kinesthetic. Sometimes that's sort of the art of misdirection that takes a
Yeah.
lot of the intimidation about grammar and fear away. And
Uh-huh.
so they were kind of easy on themselves if they couldn't accomplish the kinesthetic task.
Right, right. And you bring up this idea of fear, which I bet a lot of people do feel as they're in these remedial classes. So have you ever felt sort of pushback on these students about playing these games? What's the acceptance like? And I'm sure there's like people who just refuse to play games, who just won't accept it. Is that ever something you run into?
I really haven't had a problem with that because everything is there. I think they find it very refreshing.
Hmm.
Um, and it's so surprising that they're willing to do it and they encourage each other. So it definitely builds community in the classroom.
Right.
And so my student population is very diverse. But I do think it's typical of community or state college, open access, higher educational institutions.
Hmm.
So for example, last semester I had a class, the average age was 31. So I have students from
Wow.
18 to 60. And
Yeah.
I have a lot of students with different disabilities. There's a lot of women in their 30s, 40s, 50s who they put everybody else in their family through school and it's their turn now, but they're
Hmm.
terrified. I have a lot of students returning and they're veterans and they did 40, 50 months in Iraq
Hmm.
and they're coming back and they will tell me they're afraid of an English class, even though they've done, 4 tours in Iraq or something like that. A lot of
Yeah.
them have post-traumatic stress disorder and traumatic brain injuries. So there's a lot of challenges. one semester, 25% of my students were English as a second language learners. And
Right.
so there's a lot of barriers just because college can be intimidating, or they feel they're older than everybody else or different from other people.
Mhm.
And a lot of times the game or the prop or the toy or whatever the challenge is removes a lot of that, lets people bring their guards down, and they really start coaching each other. And then there's low stakes, and they have a lot of breakthroughs in the learning process.
That's awesome. And it's great that you approach it in this way with the wastebasket you just showed us earlier, because I think when most people think about gamifying education, they consider maybe a digital application or a tablet or something digital. You've sort of come up with this approach to make things more analog. How has that
Yeah.
been, using physical as opposed to the digital to engage with everyone? What sort of stuff have you come up with?
Well, I think that the kinesthetic aspect, the colorful things, this is, I
Hmm.
brought a lot of show and tell today. This is for
Yep.
Happy New Year, but it's to teach prepositional phrases. So there's a
Uh-huh.
preposition and then the prepositional phrase. So I do just a lot of really fun, kind of out there, do it yourself,
Hmm.
recycled. I love going to thrift stores and just thinking about how can I turn that into a way to teach.
Yeah.
So for example, here's another one for a lot of students don't know when to put an apostrophe. So I did
Sure.
these from Staples, the that was easy buttons. And
Yep.
so it's apostrophe or no apostrophe. I don't know if you can see that or not, but it's kind of
Sure. Yeah.
based on the Deal or No Deal TV show, and then they get the
Hmm.
questions and they get to play. It's interactive. Yeah,
Hmm.
I see Duchess saying I'm very frugal. This is like low tech, low budget, super creative, interactive, build community, and it has all those benefits.
That's awesome. Yeah, so, and I think the best part about going with this frugal model is the fact that I think other people can learn and sort of adopt your practices. Has anyone else in your Florida State faculty sort of seen what you've done and tried to emulate, or have you, taught this to anyone else?
Yes, in fact, Gabe was actually our convocation speaker a year and a half ago,
Yes.
and
Hmm.
he has helped our faculty, a group of our faculty work on a variety of ways to use gamification in classes.
Hmm.
And our administration is really supportive. And right now, another colleague and I are working on gamifying an entire one credit college course.
Ah, yeah, I've heard about it. Could you tell us more about what that's going on there? That sounds really awesome.
Right. Well, most colleges have a course, we call it student life skills. And
Hmm.
some colleges call it orientation or freshman class or something like that. And it's basically
Hmm.
teaching all of the skills a student needs to be successful. So it could be
Right.
everything from things like note taking or test taking strategies, very practical,
Hmm.
useful things, to some more abstract things like motivation, stress management,
Right.
metacognition, all of those, any skill, how to find resources, how to ask for help, anything that will prepare a student for success. So we're
Hmm.
designing a one credit course where students can play, it'll be online games, and this will take them through the very basics of being familiar with being a
Yeah.
student, goal setting, anti-plagiarism, emotional intelligence, a whole range of really useful techniques.
Hmm. That's fantastic. Yeah. Now, as far as I believe you brought up this idea of, I think you called it ambiguous. Um, uh,
Visual stimulus.
yes, there you go. Ambiguous visualized stimuli. Yeah, that's a funky phrase. What exactly does that mean in terms of your teachings, really?
Okay, well, this is it's actually a quote from the Jay McGonigal book Reality is Broken, in which she
Which I could put up right
describes
here.
if you if I had a wrapped present in front of us, it would it's an ambiguous visual stimulus. So it creates the interest brain reaction. So
Hmm.
there are, such as endorphins, a sense of control, anything that's interesting. So, for
Hmm.
example, let's say I just have a basket with Easter eggs. These cost like $1.49 for a dozen,
Right.
but they're colorful, but what's in them, right? So sometimes I'll put something in there and,
Yeah.
here is a word that the students have to look up in a dictionary, and then
Hmm.
I'll use a stopwatch. And for example, most students no longer use a book dictionary. They're going to check everything
Definitely.
on their iPhone or the
Yeah.
computer. And so it's still kind of a really good skill for college students to have, to be able to use a resource book. So
Hmm.
it's just exciting. It's mysterious. What is going to
Hmm.
be in the egg? And then the stopwatch, of course, adds to the sense of urgency, a little bit of competition. In two
Yep.
minutes, can you open the egg, find the word, look it up, and copy it down accurately? And
Hmm.
so the game itself sort of removes all of the obstacles, the reluctance, the objection, the slowness. So with the timer, there's, okay, let me do this, let me compete, let me try to win. And then
Hmm.
they're also learning a vocabulary word at the same time.
Awesome. Yeah, and you've so far you've mentioned, the kinesthetic, the touch element of your games, and you've just mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
the interesting, ambiguous visual stimuli. And you just mentioned, the competitive elements. Are there any other sort of elements you try to include to your games that you've had great success with?
One of my favorite experiences was Mardi Gras. Okay, so I'm from New Orleans. I lived there for 22 years. Whenever it's Mardi Gras, I'm always homesick. So one year I
Yeah.
just thought, okay, I'll bring in Mardi Gras beads and I'll just throw them for fun to the class. And
Hmm.
then before I did that, an idea occurred to me, and I thought, let me use this to teach metaphorical thinking. So
Yeah.
before I threw the beads to each student, I said, tell me how my throwing these beads to you, how is that like education? And
Right.
so I just used it. I threw out a challenge, and some students said, for example, well, if you throw this to me and I'm not paying attention, it's going to fall on the floor and I'm going to miss the information. Other students said, well, if I catch it and I learn it, I can pass it on and teach somebody else. Another
Hmm.
student said, well, each bead is like an idea that's connected to another idea, and that helps you understand everything about a subject. Well, another student said, well, it's pretty and it's shiny, and when I wear it, meaning when I'm educated, people will know that I'm bright. So they were really doing well with metaphorical thinking. And I had one student in the class, and whenever I was ready to throw it to her, she just passed. So I went through the whole class, and she was the only one who was left. And this is a student who never said a word in class.
Right.
So I was really scared she wouldn't be able to come up with anything. So finally, I threw
Hmm.
the beads to her, and she held them in her hands, and she was silent for a long time. And finally, she said, well, these are just plastic, and so they're worthless, but they represent jewels, and that means
Right.
education is precious. Well, the entire class was completely blown away. We had no idea that that student was a deep thinker, because she, up until that point, she never voluntarily participated. And the
Hmm.
game, or the prop, or the gamified element created an environment in which she could express herself, and was the star of that day. She was the star of the class. So, and everybody was surprised, and it really brought her into the social community of the class after that for the rest of the semester.
That's beautiful. Would you say that, having introduced these concepts really help you bring out those less active and more quiet people in these classes than other traditional methods?
Absolutely. Reluctance or shyness is a huge obstacle that we need to overcome because a lot of students lack confidence. Um, another example, last semester I did I call it the writing championships. So if the students are, whenever a student has a writing problem, usually the go-to solution for any English teacher is we say, go to the tutor. As
Hmm.
if it were a car and there were a problem with your car, you like send them to the mechanic, get it fixed, and then come back. But it doesn't work that way with education. But we
Yeah.
do want students to go to tutors, but they don't really want to go because
Hmm.
a lot of students are afraid to ask for help. They might feel they're out of their comfort zone. It could be intimidating. What if the tutor's judgmental? So I created something called Writing Championships. And the Writing Championships encourage students to go to tutors for 3 weeks in a row, every week for 15, 20, and then 25 minutes progressively.
Hmm.
And so there was nothing playful about the activity. It was going and working with a tutor.
Hmm.
But then there were rewards, there were extrinsic prizes. So, under the idea of rewarding the behavior you want to see more of. So, if they
Right.
went the first time, they got a pencil. The second time, they got a folder. The third time, they got
Hmm.
a spiral notebook. Things I can get for a
Hmm.
penny at Staples when they have their extreme sales.
Super sale, yeah.
So, so, um, so the students, so I had 60% participation in the class.
Hmm.
And the students brought their writing, they sat with a tutor, they worked on it. It was one on one. And they were brave enough and willing to go because the whole class was invited to do it. It wasn't just because they were weak in an area and they needed help. So it
Hmm.
totally changed the orientation and the attitude around what going to a tutor means.
Hmm.
So there were some really great outcomes from that writing championship. For one thing, within the first 5 weeks of the semester, there were 38 tutoring sessions because of the championship. Um, I had one student when I handed papers back after she worked on her paper with a tutor. She turned it in, handed them back. She looked at her paper. The whole class was looking at comments on their paper. It was totally silent in the room. And suddenly
Hmm.
we hear her voice and she's looking at her paper and she says, wow, that's my first A in her life.
Oh.
So she may not be an A student from going to a tutor just 3 times, but
Right.
for her, that was her chance to feel what it was like to get an A. And, I don't know what biochemical positive things were going on at that experience, but the whole class
Hmm.
kind of looked up and we really paid attention to that with her. In addition, after the championships, one of the outcomes that I did not predict would happen was attendance. And so in
Hmm.
that class, and so I had two of the exact same classes. One class I did the gamification challenge, and the other
Yep.
class I didn't. The class that was gamified, I had 9 classes with 100% attendance. That's
Hmm.
unheard of. The other class where there wasn't a game element involved in going to tutoring, I had 2 classes of 100% attendance. So I'm really having positive outcomes because if we want students to learn and if they have to be engaged in order to learn, and if we want to use something to engage them, they have to be there. So
Yeah.
attendance, just being present, is absolutely the first step.
Right. And I think that's a sort of a big question a lot of people have when it comes to gamification initiatives is, how do you know what you're doing is working? So I think that sort of answers that part. I guess attendance is one part. Are there any sort of factors you look at to make sure what you're doing is working? Like how much does test scores actually play into the success of these programs, would you say? Or is it just simply
Well,
empowering people to learn?
Well, it's really, really important that it's a safe learning environment,
Hmm.
because if it's not, then the opposite of what you want to happen will happen, which is
Right.
you can demotivate students. And that's the word, that's the last thing. So if
Yeah.
the competition isn't handled properly, with a lot of respect and a lot of freedom to opt out if somebody's uncomfortable,
Right.
um, it can do the opposite of what you want to achieve.
Yeah.
Um,
Exactly.
when I did grammar, I had one semester I had four classes, and I designed the Grammar Olympics specifically around an exit exam that they had to take. And out of four classes, everybody, there was one exception, but everybody else out of four classes who attended Grammar Olympics passed their exit exam and were able to go on to the next level of English. So
Hmm.
I would really like to do a lot more metrics around the gamification things that I do.
Yeah.
But just when students have a positive experience with education, I think that is a lot of reinforcement to build tenacity and resilience and
Sure.
all of the emotional, social things that
Hmm.
they're going to need to be successful.
Yeah. So those things you've mentioned are what like everyone would like infinite metrics about all the things they're doing to make sure what they're doing is right. I think for you as an educator, that's not always easy, nor do you always have the access to the tools to do that. But if you could, in an ideal, perfect world, what would you love to measure in order to make sure you're doing a good job, aside from test scores in that regard? The preparedness and tenacity. Like, what things would be like to measure if it was possible?
Well, the main thing that we want as teachers is to be able to pass on the responsibility for learning completely over to the student. And,
Hmm.
for them to have their own motivation, self efficacy, drive, lifelong learning, and all that. So, a lot of the rewards based activities
Hmm.
are extrinsic motivators.
Right.
And the question is, can those extrinsic motivators convert to intrinsic motivation?
Hmm.
And that really only happens when the student sees the value of doing that. And I mean, in the business, uh, enterprise gamification, I think that's referred to as conversion, right? You're
Sure.
taking a customer and you're becoming loyal. So in education, we look at success and retention.
Right.
And can they leave the class and then go on and continue to have fun with learning after the class on their own?
Hmm.
So I had another thing, my little, okay, can't find it. But they could go to Staples and do something like this. So they
Right.
could take a chapter and turn it to questions and answers and put it into eggs and create their own test for themselves later. Anything
Yeah.
that would inspire them to have study skills, to desire to work really hard,
Hmm.
especially as courses get more and more difficult.
Hmm. Dutch brings up an interesting question here, which is a common question about gamification education, is this idea of learning transference. Now, I know the games you're producing are specific to teaching grammar, which in itself is, a direct sort of one-to-one correlation with the learning. What about, do you have anything to speak of, learning transfer different domains? People who play games in order to be better at a different subject. What does knowledge transfer look like for you?
Well, I think any of the strategies can transfer to any other subject. So the
Hmm.
more, well, I'll give you an example. I actually took Grammar Olympics to, I usually work with adult learners, but a friend of mine's a fourth grade teacher, so I took the Grammar Olympics to her school and we set everything up. So there's different stages. There's a golfing stage, there's the basketball, there's the beanbag toss, there's a fishing game, there's a road rally, And so students progressed from station to
Mhm.
station doing different grammar challenges. Well, there were about 30 kids, and they finished in about an hour, and we had another half an hour of time.
Yeah.
Well, suddenly all of the students jumped in to take the place of the teacher in the game, and all the teachers became the players. And so we definitely switched roles, and they got to be the ones who were in charge, who were the authority figures, who were knowledgeable, who were the helpers, the coachers. So I think once you have easy strategies, it's not
Mhm.
hard at all to then flip and become the one who's teaching and then ultimately self-teaching. So I think
That's
anything
great.
could be transferred.
That's kind of like a beautiful version of the Stanley Milgram prison experiments, except you all didn't sort of destroy each other. Instead, you just decided to educate each other instead. That's fantastic to
Well,
hear. That's sort of the
well that
benefit of having like a loose organization structure.
and that is the whole thing about positive emotions and the whole positive
Mhm.
psychology and neuroscience and biochemical and community, all of those things that create a positive learning environment for to leave the room wanting to do more.
Mhm. Fantastic. Um, let's see. I also would like, so Amy, I believe you were the one who told me about a CUNY Games Festival in New York City that's coming up as well that you're speaking at. Would you care to talk more about that?
Right. Well, this is a gamification conference around game-based learning specifically for higher education. And
Hmm.
there are definitely other ones for K-12 education and of course business. So I'm really excited. It'll be my first time going. It's next weekend over the Martin Luther King weekend in New York City.
Yes.
And
Hmm.
you can just search the CUNY Games Festival. And I'll be presenting there on Friday, January 17th.
Great. Yeah, and you also have another event coming up at Anaheim as well.
Yeah, and
It's yeah.
the League for Innovation in Community Colleges has a conference called the Innovations Conference 2014, and that is going to be the first week of March, and I'm looking forward to that one too. And I'm going to just talk about I call it the exponential potential of game-based
Hmm.
learning. And I think there's
Yeah.
a really receptive audience for teacher. I mean, there's a lot going on with electronic gamification and
Yeah.
Minecraft and World of um, Warcraft uh, being used really effectively. There's also
Hmm.
in the literature area, there's some really exciting work being done by teachers using ARG, augmented reality or alternate reality games to teach literature that's really exciting.
Hmm.
So I think there's just a lot going on. It's an explosion right now of incorporating games in education.
Yes, yes. You know, and Dutch again asks a quick question about topic of books. You know, are you working on any books yourself, or do you have any suggested reading for our audience here in any of the topics we just mentioned
Well,
today?
this is a really good book, but
I've
I'm
seen that
also
before
reading
somewhere.
I'm just about to finish Fun Inc. by Tom Chatfield. I love Anna
Uh-huh.
Pennickberg's Play at Work, and I get a lot of
Yeah.
ideas, even those aren't directly about education, um,
Hmm.
to what I do. Lee Sheldon's doing some amazing stuff with the
Hmm.
multiplayer classroom, and I just started writing a book about what it means to be ready to learn and the relationship between play and readiness and learning,
Yeah.
and so hopefully I'll have more to say about that in the future.
Yeah. Please keep us updated with that, you know, and I'll be happy to plug it in and let everyone know because, you know, obviously from what you've shown us, you do amazing work, and I love that you take the analog approach because I really don't think enough people attempt to see gamification in that lens in this day and age. So I'm really, you know, enthralled with that concept. So, you know, Amy, that about wraps up today's episode. 30 minutes always passes by so quickly, as you know, because you're a regular as well. You know, I'm going to put on your contact here. Um, if anyone would like to contact Amy, you may contact her at this email address, yes.
Yes,
They can ask you any questions they like. Where else might they contact you?
that's probably the best place.
Uh-huh. Fantastic. Okay. Well, Amy, it's been absolutely lovely to have you on the show finally after you've been a audience member for so long. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. I've had a great time.
Yeah, thank you. And I'd like to just mention to everyone else who's here, G Summit 2014 tickets are available. This is where we first had Amy speak last year, 2013. Early bird tickets are now available. I would love for everyone to check it out. And if anyone wanted to submit a speaker, that is also something we're accepting now. So please feel free, check out G Summit, check out gamification.co, email Amy, ask her awesome questions, and I hope to see you all next week with another episode. Thank you all and keep having fun. Bye, guys.